What is the International Entrepreneur Parole? Can you tell us a little bit about the recent changes on the program? What advice would you give to immigration lawyers when handling a case or considering this option for their client? Hello, everyone. This is the International Entrepreneur Parole, recent updates and success stories from an immigration attorney. My name is Marianela Mansour, and I'm a partner and global director of sales and marketing here at Joorney. The International Parole Program is one of the lesser-known American business immigration programs, and it is designed to support entrepreneurs in the startup community by allowing qualified applicants to be granted temporary permission or parole to stay in the U.S. to operate and expand their startup ventures. I have a wonderful guest today to help us learn about the IEP. Her name is Fiona McEntee. She's originally from Ireland and is now based in Chicago. She's now the managing attorney at McEntee Law Group. Fiona has been practicing immigration law exclusively for 16 years now, and she's regularly featured in national and international media, including MSNBC, CNN, and the New York Times. So we're really lucky to have her. She frequently speaks and writes on the extraordinary ability visa and green cards such as O1, EB1A, as well on immigration options for startups. And in addition to that, she has found time to be a successful author, writing 2 books on immigration. Thank you so much, Fiona, for joining me today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about this.
Me too. And you know what? It's incredible. This is such an amazing program, but it has been so difficult to find an attorney who actually has done a case to be able to speak about it. So we were thrilled to know that you had. So we're really curious to go through a lot of the questions and find out more about the program.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it because I want more attorneys filing these cases because it's a great option. But I think, there's been it's all very mysterious, right? And so let's kind of tackle this today and to get some great info to people. And hopefully we'll see more cases filed and more approvals.
Let's do it, Fiona. Yes, mysterious is, I think, the right word. And there are a lot of partners who reach out to me and say, hey, what do you know about this? Do you guys, I mean, are you helping with the business plan? But the most important is that they ask me, do you know somebody who has done a case? And that's where it becomes mysterious. So
Yeah.
I'm eager to know more, Fiona. So let's dive in.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, great. Let's start with the basics. What is the International Entrepreneur Parole? And tell us a little bit about its history and how it has evolved since its conception.
Yeah, I think, that's a great way to start off because once you understand the tumultuous history of the program, it makes sense why it is so mysterious and why it is so difficult to get an attorney. There's just not that many approvals. And I think you do need to go back to the start to understand how we got here. So, ironically, yesterday I was at a big startup incubator in Chicago. I'm a mentor there, and I was at a mentor breakfast, and it kind of made me think about this program. And I started doing advocacy for this program before the regulations were finalized, which was years ago during the Obama administration. And I remember doing a presentation at this incubator space to let people know about these proposed regulations. It was in the comment period during the Obama administration, right? This option was proposed and it was very exciting. It had a lot of promise. And essentially the Obama administration what recognized the lack of startup visa in the immigration system, right? And it's like kind of how they looked at DACA, right? The DREAM Act wasn't getting passed. They said, what can we do based in the existing law? And so that's kind of what they did with this program. They looked at the existing parole authority and said, what if we said that startup entrepreneurs were going to bring significant benefit to the US? So there was proposed regulations. And at that time, I was speaking to people, I would say stakeholders in the ecosystem, right? So like other mentors or startup founders, funders, people who were all kind of interested in startups, to tell them about it. So the regulations got finalized. We were very excited. Unfortunately, though, the timing of the program going into effect was actually during the Trump administration's tenure, right? So it was supposed to kick off about 6 months into the Trump administration, and it came to a screeching halt. The Trump administration was like, we don't need this. We already have, so much for being pro business, right? So anyway, they basically blocked it. There was litigation, all sorts of stuff. So needless to say, it never really got going during the Trump administration, because they said that they were going to block it and rescind it and all sorts of stuff. So along came the Biden administration, and the Biden administration said, we are going to revive the program. And we were very excited about that. And, the desire was definitely there from the Biden administration. I think, however, from a procedural point of view, it just took a lot longer to get going than people had anticipated.
Yes. But it eventually did,
It
correct?
eventually did. There was an announcement made a few years ago by the Biden administration that they were officially, reviving this program. The big roadblock, though, was that processing times were not listed, right? And it became this, chicken and an egg program. Like, I always butcher American phrase, because I'm from Ireland, and sometimes I'm like trying to use an American expression and I use it incorrectly. But I think this is it. It's like a chicken or egg, right? Where
Exactly.
the USCIS said, well, we can't give processing times because we don't have enough cases filed. And then immigration attorneys said, well, we're not filing cases until we have the processing time. So it became this kind of situation. But I'm happy to report, and we'll probably get into this later, that cases are getting adjudicated. The backlog that had been in there has been cleared. And so this is definitely, should, I think, become part of the analysis for clients when you're looking at visa or immigration options for them.
Amazing. And that's very exciting to hear this news. And the more confidence and certainty that we can give to other immigration attorneys, at least we will make them research a little bit more and feel more confident on saying, hey, this is an option for you,
Yeah.
right?
And you know what? It might not be your best option. There may be better options, but I think it deserves, consideration. And for
Exactly.
some people, it might be their best option. And certainly for one of my clients, it was. So I just think put it into the mix, right, and assess it as you would any other option. And I really do understand the reluctancy, up until this point. So I understand why people have been, just not willing to really go for this. I was in that boat for a while, but now I think it's kind of a different ball game now.
Excellent, Fiona. Can we share like the basics of the checklist? What is the eligibility criteria for this program?
Yeah. So, okay, this option was really created for startup founders, entrepreneurs who have raised money from US based sources. Okay. So, when you think about it, not every company is there can be businesses that are just not scalable, maybe not investable from like a venture capital point of view. And there's nothing wrong with that. They can be very, successful businesses, but they're not necessarily ripe for that kind of investment. So when you think about it, you think about the startup entrepreneur, the software, the tech company that has like a B2B software, that kind of thing, right? So you're looking for entrepreneurs with US based companies. They can recently incorporate the entity, and that company needs to have received funding, and there's different threshold amounts, but essentially just big picture US startups, companies that have received funding from either venture capitalists, angel investors, accelerator programs, or funding from, I think the lesser kind of option that we haven't really seen much of is from government grants, state, federal, local government grants.
Okay. So that covers the eligibility for them, that they had
I mean,
received
I
funding.
I would say, like, if you're in this kind of, if you have a startup entrepreneur that's in this type of realm, then you start to, you consider this, and then you go through, there's a deeper dive that you need to do in terms of the eligibility. So for example, if you are looking for the venture capital investment amount or the angel investment amount, that previously was around 265,000, and it is increasing. These amounts have been adjusted up with inflation. It's increasing to just a little over 300,000 come October. So, so that's kind of one way to qualify, but then you do need to drill down again. So there's kind of several layers of like an onion analysis that you need to do. The investor needs to be somebody that invests in startups regularly. So there's a whole way to qualify an investor as well. And the startup founder needs to have a minimum of 10% of ownership in the entity. It is complex in terms of, it's not just one, but every visas and every immigration options like that, right? There's never just one box that you need to check. And the important thing to note as well is that if you don't meet the threshold amounts, there is space for allowing some combination of funding, even if it's lower than the threshold amount, with additional evidence to show high potential for growth and job creation. That is kind of the overarching thing that you're trying to prove, that this startup, that this founder, the company has high potential for growth and job creation.
That's amazing. So I mean, it takes convincing on both sides. It's the applicant and whoever's doing the funding, correct?
To proceed with this option.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, look, in my experience with working with VCs, I guess it depends on the market, right? There was a time where there was so much money available, and the valuations had gone through the roof, and people were just investing in startup founders, figure everything else out later, type of thing, right? So sometimes you see that where the investment has already been made and that's already been done, and then you need to try and see, okay, is this fitting within this option? Or I'd say less often you're working with the VC or the funder to try to establish eligibility before the money has been made. I think that happens just less often in the market.
Amazing. In what scenarios, Fiona, would you recommend a client to pursue this program over any other option in general?
Okay, so I think to answer that question, you need to figure out, well, what are the other options that you're potentially considering. And I explain this to clients when I meet with them. If they could see inside my brain, and there'd be a lot of crazy stuff in there, but like part of it is like me doing this, like a kind of a process of elimination, right? You have this alphabet soup of like immigration, visa options, things like this, and you're like, kind of like pushing some things to the side, adding things in, and you're doing all this. And then depending on the client, you end up with, considering, let's say, an L1, option if they have an entity outside the US. You're maybe one of the E's, E1, E2s, perhaps.
But the ownership is a big one there, right?
Yeah, and it's also, if they're raising funds, how they may meet that 50% threshold for being an ownership by a treaty country, but if they're getting VC funding at some point, their ownership is being diluted down. And it really has to remain at all times at least 50% owned by nationals from the treaty country. So I'd either think about the E, the L, maybe the O1 as well, depending on kind of like how much traction the startup has received. And then this potentially, right? So I would say the type of person that this could work for would be maybe an international student who hasn't really had a lot of experience in working in their bachelor's program, for example, and they haven't had any previous jobs. Maybe they have this idea for a startup, but it's quite early, and maybe they don't have enough to qualify them for the O, and they're probably not from a treaty country, or even if they are, it just might not fit, right? And there's no entity outside the US, so you're not considering the L. So that's the kind of
Yeah.
way I might get to this option working for somebody.
That makes sense. So yes, canceling out E's, canceling out L's, and then if it's there's no extraordinary thing about the profile of that person, then this would be the right one.
Yeah, it could be. And it also, immigration is like a series of steps in a journey, right? Some people's journey has more stops along the way. And, just because this is your first stop or maybe your second stop following F1 or, whatever, it doesn't mean it's your forever. It's not your permanent destination, right? So maybe it's like,
Exactly.
let's see if we can get you on this, and then let's work up to the O, being mindful of what criteria might be suitable for you. So it's not your forever option. Absolutely not. But is it good enough for right now? Because the way tech and AI and the evolution, things are moving so quickly. It is important that people are able to get work authorized so that they can build and grow and create these jobs here. And time can be critical. So this is why I think this option should be in the mix, at least to be considered. And again, it's up to, the attorney and the client to mutually decide if this is the best fit for them.
Excellent, Fiona. Thank you. Let's talk about the current approval rate of the program and how many cases have been filed.
So this was the mystery, right? This was part of the mystery where we didn't know how many cases had been filed. And recently, the mystery has been uncovered, right? So there's a great writer, journalist, Stuart Anderson, who writes a lot for Forbes. He wrote a great article on this, and he was able to get some great data. So as of just a couple of weeks ago, the data that we had was that 94 cases in total had been filed throughout the course of the program. So since inception, if we think about like the Trump, there were people that people did file during the Trump administration. And then, fast forward to present day during the Biden administration. So 94 were filed and only 26 of those cases had been approved as from the data that we had received.
Okay. That's very important to consider as well, right? So somebody who is applying through this program, it's like none of the other options worked, but this is an option. Do you want to try it? Yes or no? And these are the numbers, right?
Yeah. And you know what? I think with immigration, there is a lot of trust and it's a leap of faith, sometimes with things, right? You can never, as an attorney, ethically guarantee any particular option. But as I say to my team here, I would want me to be an attorney for me, right? Because I know how zealous and determined. And when I got this case, I was determined to not only get it approved, which again, you can't guarantee, but to get it expedited, to get it approved in a prompt manner. You again couldn't guarantee it, but I made assurances to the client that I would do whatever I could to try, to be as zealous, to be as creative, to like look at the environment that we're in right now and to see what tools do we have at our disposal that we can put together to make a really compelling case for, a prompt adjudication. And this is where I think attorneys need to be really aware of government policy. And right now, I don't know when this will be airing, right? But I'm assuming in the Biden, during the Biden administration's, Biden Harris,
Yes.
right? We have great policy from this administration. It's everything from, January 2022 statements on STEM immigration to, the mission statement of the USCIS to executive orders on artificial intelligence, which are coming up to the 1-year anniversary of that, right? Where there's like specific policy things in there that you can
build up
use.
to it.
Yeah, you can use those to, try to like be as persuasive as possible to the USCIS to say this is exactly the type of person that the president is talking about when we're saying, we need really smart, people that are going to put us at the cutting edge. Like this is the person that President Biden is talking about.
Exactly. It can't be more clear than that.
No, but like here's with with USCIS, or State Department, you don't want to leave it up to the officers to make that, to draw those lines, right? You want to connect those dots as much as you can. And that's what I think, is our job as attorneys, is really to make sure that we're utilizing that and all the evidence, whether it's a business plan where you're like highlighting, jobs created, and then you're talking about the importance of that. Like, there's just a lot of tools at our disposal, and
Exactly.
I would just encourage people to use them. And then another thing that I always say, I'm like a broken record when I speak at ALA panels about this, is the policy manual. I'm always like, the policy manual, using the words of the USCIS in supportive
Exactly.
cases is really important.
And I've heard this for other visas as well, other webinars that we've had where they go back to that. So definitely a crucial tip for
Mm-hmm.
immigration attorneys. Um, let's talk about your case, Fiona. So you were saying that you had a lot of determination with that client or that applicant that decided to go for it. Can you tell us a little bit more about the case overall?
Yeah, I can share a little bit. There's not I can share more later on, when other stuff comes out. But right now, what I can share is that it was an AI startup entrepreneur.
Mhm.
He actually, I'm allowed to share his name, McCall Patnaik, and he is the founder of a company called Portal. And it's an AI based company, and we were delighted to work with him. He's great, and this is public, and he allowed me to mention him in a piece that I wrote with some other friends and fellow immigration lawyers in the Well News. We wrote an op-ed on this. And so he is one of the 26 approvals, and we got his case approved in what I think is record time, because I know some of those approvals took years,
Mhm.
whereas our case took months to get approved. And yeah, he was a great client. He was he trusted me, and we worked together as a team, and we got a great result for him.
That's amazing. Congratulations on that, Fiona. One
Thank
of 26. I mean not only of the 26, but also of the whole batch of people who applied, right? We're talking about 120.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, but if you think about, how I started this off, right? Yesterday at 1871, the big incubator in Chicago, I this is something that I have been deeply passionate about for so many years. And so for me, it was kind of a culmination of, close to like 10 years of advocacy and of really pouring my passion into something. And so it meant a lot
Yeah.
for me as well, because it just is not, it wasn't like a fleeting kind of option that I just heard about. Like, it's something that I've cared so
Exactly.
deeply about for so long. So it was really special.
Yes, congratulations, Fiona. And that's one of the reasons why you're here now, right? The idea is not only, okay, I got one case approved, but basically paving the way for all those other applicants that can choose this route and change America and make it competitive and cutting edge and top in technology. It's a purpose beyond the individual case, but that's the milestone that opens it up, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really my philosophy on working as an immigration lawyer anyway. Yes, it's about the cases on a one-to-one level, but it's also about the bigger picture of the immigration system.
Exactly.
And it's something that, this is what drives me to do work that is maybe not part of other people's everyday work, like speaking to members of Congress about startup immigration options and advocacy there, writing op-eds and things like that, and doing media stuff where you're trying to just information share, because I feel like we have a very privileged position as immigration attorneys, getting to see, I think it's a front row seat to some of these incredible immigration stories, right? And I feel when you hear a lot of negative talk in the media, online about immigrants, it really, upsets me, because obviously I know that that is truly not reflective of immigration, right? And when we have the ability to share these stories in a way that is respectful to the client, that is, kind of honors the contributions that they make, and enables people to kind of maybe think about it in a different way. And I don't want to always preach to the choir, people who always agree with us about immigration. I think it's important that we kind of broaden out and speak to people who maybe just, oh, I've never thought about that part of immigration as well.
Exactly.
And yeah, like when this option was proposed, there were some stats about, how many hundreds of thousands of jobs could be created by people utilizing this program. And obviously that didn't happen because of the tumultuous history. But now that we're here, there's no reason why we can't really fulfill the mission of this program. And I really want more people to learn about it and to consider it, because it can be a great option for some people.
Exactly. And then we look at the US, and then we look at the world, and there are other countries who already have their own startup visas. You have Canada with the startup visa. They have some recent updates as well. You have the UK with the innovator founder visa. So it starts becoming competition, because if they can come to the US, then they may choose another place, another location, and then they'll generate jobs over there and not in the US, right? So it's also competition on a global scale.
It absolutely is. And, throughout my advocacy work, I've really learned a lot about options in other countries. And when you think about this, much like DACA was, an executive solution to the a lack of a dream act, right? The Obama administration looked at the lack of a startup visa in the law. And it's not to say that there's never been attempts to pass a startup visa. There have been many attempts to pass one, and there have been it's been bipartisan support as well, but never enough to get something passed. And I hope that this changes. But until then, this is the option that we have. And you're right, it makes us less competitive on a global basis. And I would also urge people to think about, the jobs that can be created by this program, but also the type of people that are, perhaps availing of this program, maybe international students. And the value that international students bring to the US is incredible. And it's one of our most valuable assets here is the international student community. And we do not want those international students going to study in Canada or in the UK or anywhere else. I will just put a side note that I'm a little biased because I came to the US as an international student myself. But you need to think about this bigger picture. Yes, it's the jobs. Yes, it's the startup businesses. Yes, it's the, some of these businesses are like critical security, AI, med tech, all this kind of stuff. But it's also like the people that start them maybe are here as international students, and we want to encourage as many international students to come here as possible.
Exactly. So they're being educated, then they get their OPT, but then they leave. So there's a huge gap that that's where maybe this program can fit, like you say. Definitely.
Yeah.
Fiona, can you tell us a little bit about the recent changes on the program? Because we heard that there were some changes coming, I believe, on the thresholds of the amounts.
Yeah, so some of the threshold amounts have been updated. So there's a couple of there's a lot of like figures in International Entrepreneur Parole. There's the threshold amount for the investment. So like how much money, right? And we mentioned that it's not a firm, there is some space for potentially, qualifying if you don't meet that threshold, but those amounts have all been updated, both from the qualified investor as like the VC angel, and also from like the government grants, right? Then there's amounts that the investor must have invested in previous startups. There's amounts that the startup that other investments need to have generated certain revenue. So there's a kind of a lot of figures involved, and all the amounts are being updated. So you can go to the USCIS and you can see the updated threshold amounts. As of I think October, they're going into effect. And so that's one update. But the other updates that I think are really important is, again, go to the USCIS website. There's a whole section of FAQs that have been updated. I would direct people to, looking at the things like if I can pull up the question, but it basically talks about timing and how long they processing times, FAQs. So they're asking, how long, or the question is, how long do these cases take? And the USCIS confirms that as of May 2024, they've either completed or sent requests for evidence for all previously filed I-941 applications. And here's to quote, "We look forward to adjudicating new applications as expeditiously as possible." So if I was filing a case today, I would be bold, print, highlight, like, yeah, you said you're ready to adjudicate them. Let's go. Here we go. Right. And then still include all the other stuff. But the USCIS has been really, really proactive in updating, the policy manual, the FAQs. There's a lot of resources at your fingertips. So I would absolutely encourage people to like look at all those directly from the horse's mouth, so to speak.
And this is important in an industry where speed is not the strength. There are a lot of programs that are delayed, that they have a backlog. So just knowing that there's like special focus on this program should definitely be a motivation.
Yeah. And I would just say a couple of things. There's no premium processing, right? So this is where you need to, be advocating from the get-go. You should also look at the criteria for expediting cases, which is a general criteria. There's one is like severe hardship, financial hardship to a person or company. I would absolutely argue that if the startup founder is not able to be in the US and work on their startup, that is absolutely going to cause like severe hardship to the company. But obviously we know we can't just say these things. We need to document them by evidence. So getting some letters from maybe the funder, from other key stakeholders in the industry to talk about the hardship that would be suffered if the case isn't adjudicated in a prompt manner.
Exactly. And now that you're talking about some of the documentation, can we go through the main steps of the application and also what type of documentation is required? I know you mentioned it briefly, but it would be nice to go like on a step-by-step.
Yeah. Okay. So the form that you're going to be looking at is the I-941, which is the application for International Entrepreneur Parole. You also might be submitting an I-131, which is the advanced parole application if the person is in the US. Because this is it's not something that you change status to in the US. You need to get the case adjudicated and approved, and then you need to make an entry so you can be paroled into the US. So that's one part of it. Then you need to really look at the requirements for this case, right? So you're thinking about, okay, you need to show that the company, that the individual has at least 10% ownership in a company that's been created in the past 5 years. So you're looking at all the ownership documentation, you're looking at the cap table, share certificates, operating agreements, like all the corporate documentation. And we need to show that the applicant is going to have a central and active role in the company. So we're thinking about, job descriptions, like anything that kind of shows that they're in this like CEO, CTO kind of critical like founder role. And then you need to show that the company, here's where you get into the kind of the figures here, and the investment. We're showing that the company is going to have a positive benefit on the US, and we're looking at the investment threshold. We're looking at where the money came from. If it's coming from a qualified investor, we need to qualify that investor. So we need to show that they have made investments in the past. And of those investments, we need to show that that some of the investments have done well. So they've either created jobs or they've grown. So you're going to need some documentation from the VC.
That's an important one, right? Because they're basically saying you can't just receive angel investment from a cousin that has money, right, and then you're eligible, right?
Yeah. And I always think about the rationale and the policy here, right? The idea is, with this and like with other options, like the O, for example, right? If you look at the list of the criteria for the O, you're kind of making the case that people who are kind of experts in the industry or who have a lot of kind of resources at their disposal have predetermined that this makes sense for them, right?
They're betting it for the government, basically.
Yeah, so exactly. So why wouldn't we rely on a seasoned investor who makes, who they're in the business of investing? And
Exactly.
so that is kind of what you're trying to prove. Yeah, it's not your uncle Tom who just really wants to, like, you know, be your cheerleader. It is like people who invest in startups.
Mhm.
And that's what you need to show. And I think that that is often the case with things like this. And like I think with the O as well, that like other people, like if you're using press, for example, in an O1, like journalists who write about startups for a living have like picked you to feature in their, you know, article on the next hottest AI trends in what
Exactly.
consumer, whatever, you know, so that kind of thing. So there's documentation there that you do need from the VC. You also are really wanting to highlight this potential for rapid growth and job creation.
Mhm.
So it could be things like, do you have any users signed up? Do you have any revenue? You don't have to, but you can be pre-rev. But if you have revenue, if you've done any additional fundraising, I would include that as well. If you've done some fundraising, crowdfunding, or some
Crowdfunding.
other kind of campaigns or something that maybe are not meeting the definition for qualified investor, I would still include that.
Mhm.
If there's any impact in terms of social, national, you know, any positive things that you can kind of show, I would include that. If the founder's done stuff, you know, in the past that is, you know, important, you could throw that in as well. Any press accelerators, things like that. Obviously, if they've already hired, that's great potential, you know, evidence to show that they're going to hire in the future. If
Mhm.
you do have a business plan that outlines, you know, future plans for growth and job creation, that's important, because that's really the crux of the case, is showing this potential for growth and job creation. So they're the types of things that you would be including. What I love about startups is that, you know, chances are if you're raising money from sophisticated people, some of this information you already have a pitch deck, you have a one pager, you have the, you know, you're like, oh, you always see this, like imagine the Shark Tank, the total market, you know, the TAM is there's 10, you
Yeah.
know, 4 billion people who do that, you know, and so like you have
Exactly.
all these like things that you can pull from,
Yeah.
and obviously kind of make sure that it makes sense for the case. But I would look to see what the founder already has.
Exactly. And that's funny you mentioned that, but because we tell that to our team every time that we're talking about startup visa, business plans, and financial models in Canada. I mean, watch Shark Tank. That's going to help you sell it. That's going to help you understand what's happening out there.
Yeah.
So when you start talking about the documentation and also the importance of the business plan, it reminds me of the startup visa business plan that we've done many. Like I was mentioning before, the UK Innovator Founder
Mm-hmm.
Visa, we've done many of those. Um, the EB2 NIW, where you also need to prove. I mean, a lot of evidence goes there to support the fact that that applicant is going to, I mean, has the capacity to make a big impact. Then you talk about job creation. You talk about a little bit of an E2, a little bit of an L1 on the job duty. So it's important to be able to gather that in a comprehensive document that can help you with all the best practices that you're mentioning, Fiona, for this particular program. So it's very interesting for us as
Yeah.
well.
And also keep in mind that this is not the bread and butter of the USCIS, right? They are not doing this day in, day out. Like they've only reviewed less than 100 of, you know, of these cases. So you really need to make it as clear and as easy for them as possible. And that's with our case. I felt so, you know, sure about the approvability of it. I was like, this is a slam dunk. Like this is cake. But you need to be so clear about presenting the evidence in a way, because of those cases that have been adjudicated, I know a lot of them got requests for evidence, and I know this from other attorneys. We did not. And again, it's not to say, but just keep in mind that they're not used to doing this on, you know, they don't have institutional knowledge of over 30 years of reviewing L1A cases or whatever. So you need to be aware of that and prepare your case accordingly, to just make it as crystal clear that this should be approved, and not only approved without a request for evidence, and approved in an expedited manner.
Exactly. Definitely. Fiona, any critical factors that USCIS is considering during the review process, and how can lawyers ensure that their clients' applications stand out? I mean, you mentioned a few of these throughout, but anything that we've been missing?
I would really encourage people to go to the USCIS website to look at the FAQs, right? There were FAQs that were created based on questions that the USCIS had received. One example I'll give you, this was back in the day, right? So a couple of years ago, before these recent updates came out, somebody had a question about venture capital money, right? If people are familiar with how this system works, basically there's limited partners in a fund and there's general partners and there's all different people involved in a venture capital fund. And the question was, because venture capitalists, the partners are getting money from other people as well. So everyone's kind of like, money is being put from one thing into another. And so the question was, if the original funders are from outside the US, but the managers of the fund are in the US, is that going to be okay for this? And they answered the question and said, yeah, as long as the general partners are in the US, it's kind of managed and controlled by US citizens, green card holders. That's just like one example of a very specific question that was asked and answered by the USCIS. So I would absolutely encourage people to really familiarize yourself with the information on the website. And it also can, there's some logistics involved here as well, given that it's this parole program. So you're going to need to, get your client either advanced parole if they're here in the US, or a boarding foil at an embassy overseas. So, and the USA, there were some unknowns, getting back to the kind of mystery of it all. There were some unknowns there. And the USCIS has gone ahead and kind of updated those things as well. So there's like a whole section on what happens after approval, like State Department and things like that. So I would just really encourage people to familiarize themselves with the USCIS website.
I'm going to ask the team to add the link wherever we're posting it to both the program link and also the FAQs for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fiona, what do you see as the future of the IEP in the broader context of U.S. immigration law, and what trends should immigration lawyers be watching?
So the future in my mind, I'll kind of premise this by saying I am a very optimistic person in general, which I think is kind of a prerequisite for working in this field, right? So I'm like, I see so many of these cases being filed and all these jobs that are being created, and like, then we'll get a startup. This is in my rosy mind of this is what I'm thinking. But truly, right, this was created for a reason, because there is a gap in the immigration system for something like this. We need this option, and it can really work well. And yes, I understand why people have been reluctant to date, but I think that needs to be put aside now. And you have it not just from me. And sure, there's things the USCIS could have done better and different and, whatever, but that is, in the past. Right now, we have, that sentence that I said, they're ready and excited to file. Well, I added in excited. I'm assuming they're as excited as I am about these cases, but they're ready to review them as expeditiously as possible. And I want this program to live up to its full potential, which was, a lot of these cases getting filed, entrepreneurs being able to build and grow their companies here in the US, and then corresponding jobs being created. And it's all part of like the narrative of immigration, right? We know that immigrants always give more than they ever take from any country. We can see just from startups alone, over half of the unicorns in the US have an immigrant founder. A quarter of them came here as an international student. This was all done in spite of the very outdated immigration system. So I think that if people were able to navigate that without options like this, I think what else could they do, or how many more of these companies could we have if people are utilizing a more modern immigration option?
Exactly. And Fiona, you're saying that you're optimistic, and we see the numbers of approvals, which are a little bit underwhelming. I mean, it's less than 30%, but do you think that that's historic and the more recent ones are being approved more?
Yes, I think so. I think a lot of those cases that were filed, people withdrew them. I think people kind of just abandoned them. I think that, I spoke to somebody who had filed one during the Trump administration, not through us, and they basically, the person was outside the US. At some point, the case was denied. Apparently, there was a request for evidence issued. They never got it. So this kind of thing was happening as well. So yes, I think we need to, the historical data is important, right? Because it kind of gives us a picture of like, kind of where we stand right now, but it's not, I don't think, indicative of like what's going to happen in the future. So
Yes, it feels like that as well for us, and giving all the updates that you're sharing and the focus of the administration on it. I mean, it feels that it should be of higher approvals from now onwards, at
yeah.
least. For sure. Fiona, and do you think that this program is going to be the option for startups, or do you feel the government will come up with a startup visa specific type of program? This is more of a personal
Yeah.
question.
I want an option in the law, right? A startup visa, and not just me, but I think other people do, right? Because you can see how options like International Entrepreneur Parole program, using the existing parole authority, regulations can be changed from one administration to the next. We don't have the security of having a startup visa, law, and I think that's what we need. And we want, we don't want people to be thinking, oh, I'll file this because this administration will support it. Oh, but then what happens in the next administration? That's not really how an immigration system should function.
Exactly.
So I think ultimately the solution is a startup visa. And there have been, most recently there was one proposed by Representative Lofgren, which was the Like Act, the Let Immigrants Kickstart the Economy Act. And it kind of mirrored the requirements of International Entrepreneur Parole, and it also had a green card option there. And there was more options for employees of startups, so it was more expansive. So ultimately, that's where I think we need to be. But I think we need to be having more of these conversations, because the issue in
Exactly.
Congress is that no matter what the topic, the answer is the southern border. And so we need members of Congress who recognize that there are many different parts of the immigration system, and the border is a part, but it is not the only part.
Definitely. So to end our conversation today, Fiona, what advice would you give to immigration lawyers when handling a case or considering this option for their clients?
So the first thing I would say is you need to consider it, right? So put it into that analysis. And because if you're not even considering it, it just doesn't even, if it's not on your radar, it's not even becoming part of, your process of elimination options
Exactly.
for people. So add it into the mix, and then start to, listen to your client about fundraising, about either past fundraising or, present or future, to see if this might be a good fit for them. And if it is, then you need to really drill down on the requirements, the criteria, to see if it's going to work for them. Obviously, there is this uncertainty, even though we do have the confirmation that the cases are going to be adjudicated promptly. We don't know what that means. It's not like a premium processing where there's 3 weeks, so we don't know. And I think you need to obviously be totally transparent with your client. And you need to, kind of explain to them. You can share the data with them, as I did with my client. It was totally transparent. But you also need to be zealous. If you're going to go for this option, I wouldn't just sit back and let the USCIS just like review it. I think you need to be really determined. And as I've mentioned a few times, utilize the government resources as much as you can. And that's across the board for any type of case that you're doing. The policy manual, the statements of the administration, the executive order on AI, critical and emerging technologies lists. There's just a lot of great information right now that we can use in all these cases.
Amazing, Fiona. Thank you. So add it to the options, manage your client expectations, and definitely commit to it with a high level of determination.
Yes, that's a
The
great
end.
summary. Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent, Fiona. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation to be here in this live recording. We truly appreciate all your knowledge and expertise, and we hope that with this recording, we can also contribute to the immigration industry and find options for all those applicants and help the U.S. overall.
Yes,
We
I do
appreciate
too.
it.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to speak on this topic that you can tell is very near and dear to my heart. And I just am excited for us all to be having more of these conversations. So I really appreciate the invitation.
Definitely, Fiona. Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye bye.